Kids today are growing up in a world scientists are still trying to fully understand. And as a father, this sort of hits close to home. That sentence alone is already mildly terrifying. Because researchers are now finding microscopic plastic particles in places we never expected, including the human body. And the part that really gets people's attention, children may be more vulnerable to them than adults. Now, I don't want you to think this is one of those fear-based, everything is toxic videos. That's not what this is. The goal here isn't panic. It's understanding where exposure happens and what practical things families can actually control. So first, what are microplastics? We've covered this before, so I won't go too in-depth on this. But they're tiny plastic particles that come from things like plastic bottles, food packaging, synthetic clothing, carpets, household products. Basically, modern life. Over time, plastic breaks down into smaller and smaller little pieces until those particles become microscopic. And researchers are now finding them in drinking water, food, indoor air, and even household dust. Now here's why children are part of the conversation. According to the CDC, kids eat, drink, and breathe more relative to their body weight than adults do. Their bodies are also still developing, which means environmental exposures can affect them differently. In simple terms, kids aren't just tiny adults. Their exposure levels can actually be proportionally higher. When you hear about microplastics, do you tend to picture trash floating in the ocean? Honestly, this is what probably surprises most people. Exposure happens in very normal, everyday environments. For example, drinking water. Studies have detected microplastics both in tap water and bottled water around the world. Food packaging is another one, especially when it's heated, like microwaving leftovers in plastic containers. Indoor air and dust also matter more than people realize. Synthetic carpets, furniture, and clothing can shed microplastic fibers into the air inside of your home. And because children spend more time indoors, closer to floors and surfaces, they can be exposed more often. Now, I want to be really careful here. Scientists are still actively studying the long-term effects of microplastics. There's still a lot of research that is going on that we are trying to understand. So this video is not about pretending that we have every answer already. But what we do know is that exposure is widespread enough that major health organizations are paying attention to it. And when it comes to kids, reducing unnecessary exposure where we reasonably can, that's just common sense. Though here's the distinction I think most people overlook. There's a difference between reducing exposure and physically reducing particles at the point of consumption. For example, using less plastic around food is reducing exposure. Not heating food in plastic is reducing exposure. Those are good habits. But when it comes to something like drinking water, there's also the physical filtration side of the conversation. And that matters because water is one of the few exposure pathways families interact with every single day. So what can families actually do without turning their house into a science experiment? Honestly, a few small habits can go a long way. Use glass or stainless steel containers when possible. Avoid microwaving food in plastic. Reduce single-use plastics where it makes sense. Vacuum and dust regularly to reduce indoor particles. And pay attention to drinking water quality and filtration. Not because perfection is possible. It's not. Microplastics are now part of the modern environment. The goal is just reducing everyday exposure in practical ways. Practical ways. That's the key takeaway here. Because I say this all the time, and I'll keep saying it. This isn't about fear. It's about awareness. Because let's face it, the best decisions usually happen when people understand why something matters instead of just being told to worry about it. Am I right? Especially when it comes to something as fundamental as the water you and your family drink every single day.